suddenly in walks 5 beings. And I call these ET beings. They're not angels. They don't have wings or anything like that. They look like extraterrestrials to me. They threatened me. Don't you ever tell of us, don't ever speak of us. They were hooded and cloaked. And they went down the hall to speak with my father. My name is Bonnie Jennings, and I live in Texas. And so my childhood possibly plays into this. And so I'm going to begin back when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And my father had built our home in East Texas. And he was a mechanical engineer for the government. And he also was in the Air Force. His specialty was missiles and rockets. In World War II, he had been a navigator. And during that period of time, they didn't have instruments that could navigate an aircraft. So they used a human being to look at the stars and determine where an aircraft was in the world. And so he'd have to know time zones and where what the constellations were. When I was growing up, he would teach me a great deal of that. It was before the Vietnamese War. As a child, he came in at one point and he started talking about what he saw. He had been at the plant and they went up on the launch pad, and immediately they were surrounded by white lights or lights, pastel lights of various colors, and they totally surround them. He had a photographer with him. The photographer was taking pictures of them, and so immediately he was sent to Washington, D.C. to be debriefed. And he was told never to speak about this ever again. And so he kept his mouth shut, but when he was in the garage doing his projects, he'd mutter. And Project Blue Book had come to our home. I don't remember what year, but he would mutter under his breath how much he disliked them. He would discredit them because they were telling him to shut up. In the middle of the night, the house that my father built, in the room where I slept, out came some beings, very, very, very tall beings. And they threatened me. Don't you ever tell of us, don't ever speak of us. They were hooded and cloaked. And they went down the hall to speak with my father. And they spoke using telepathy. And so they came a few times, maybe 3, maybe 4 times when I was a kid. But I seemed to know when they were coming because I got very fearful. Many years later, and my daughter and I started talking about this, and she said, well, I used to have them come visit me too. And I said, really? And I said, don't tell me what they look like. Draw a picture of them, and I'll draw one, and let's compare. And so we compared, and so my daughter was about 6 or 7 when they started coming to her when we go home to visit my mother in the same house. Okay, so what we drew on the paper was exactly the same thing. Very tall beings, hooded. They threatened her. They threatened her about her brother if she did anything that they would harm him. So all my life, I was thrilled or desiring to know so much more about ETs and UFOs. 2014, somewhere in there, that I started taking pictures of the sky, and I was drawn to the clouds. and I'd start taking pictures of the sky. And when I take pictures of it, in front of my eyes, I'd see there's an aircraft, there's a UFO there in the clouds, and you couldn't see it with the visual eye, but I started taking pictures of it. And that was in the winter, February the 8th of 2019. I'm a person who's very sensitive to medication, so I had taken some medication, and I started having a reaction to that medication, started swelling, and so on the 5th, February the 8th, I couldn't breathe. None of my inhalers were working. None of my medication was working. And so I collapsed on the floor about 10:30 or 11:30 at night. I was up the next morning and told my son to call 911. I needed help. So I must have had several experiences at once. And so at this point, I'll tell you that I went 30 minutes without oxygen. So it left me with an anoxic brain injury, which for about 3 or 4 years, I had great difficulty trying to remember things. And I still do. I excuse me. It also left me with a raspy throat. They had to intubate me. I was in ICU for about, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 days, as I recall. Now, remember, on the other side, there is no time. So there's no timeline. So my brain put things in order. It does not necessarily mean that it happened in this order. It's just that I had to put it into an order to make sense. So we are like sitting in a pod on the other side. And inside that pod, we are creating this, everything that's around us. And so it's like when you're in a pod, it's similar to being in a balloon. I call it a red balloon, but everything is at one time. But when you're in this life right now, then a part of that balloon is popped out and you are in the moment of right now. And when that moment ends, it goes back into the pod. And you might come out at another time, in another place, in another area, forward, backwards, wherever it is. There is no timeline over there. Okay, so you're not going, oh, you're going to come back in 2056, or, you may go back to 1495 or BC or whenever. Okay. And so I get to the other side, and suddenly I feel like I'm in a petri dish and I am alone. I'm all by myself. And somebody asked me about how long was I in that petri dish. And the only thing I could come up with is like I was a seedling. And when I grew and I birthed leaves and I was a plant, I called out and I said, hey, I'm over here. Is anybody here? Am I alone? And immediately something came over and moved me off the shelf, and I began my near-death experience in another way, in a deeper way. And so the next thing I remember, I was in the mountains, and there were snow-capped mountains everywhere. And I saw blood coming down the side of the mountains and a stream of blood. And I said, oh my God, am I in hell? And I looked to a little distance from me, and there was an Asian man who had a straw hat on, and he was using a cane. And I said, am I in hell? And he says, do you believe you're in hell? And I said, well, no. And he says, well, then you're not. And I said, well, where is this? What are you doing? He says, you're at the cleansing pool. These are brains. I'm cleansing the brains. And every time you go to another level, I'll be cleansing your brains. And I said, well, does it hurt? And he said, well, did it? And I said, I don't remember anything. And he said, okay, so every time you move to another level, you'll come back here and I'll re-cleanse you so that you can go on. And I said, okay. And with that, I was gone and I was at the next level. So at the next level, I'm in the desert and it's very cold. There's no breeze. It's not hot. There's no temperature. But again, I'm alone. And the sand is gold. And I see in the distance a huge stone and it's moving towards me at a very slow path. It's going through the sand like this. And finally it comes to roll up in front of my feet. And I looked at it and there were no markings on the stone. It was huge. It was about 18 feet tall. It was very, very thick, maybe 2 feet thick. And it was gigantic weight. And I saw no markings. But all of a sudden, I looked on it to see if that was my life or was that my lives, or I wasn't for sure if it was lives or one life. But at that point, the 5 and 6 o'clock space opened up and I walked through it. I wrote a book and I drew little pictures of it when my brain was extremely anoxic. And they're like children images, but in my book, you can see what I was thinking. So I walked through the space, and in that space, I'm in Egypt, and I'm looking around, and suddenly I see my guide, and he and I are together, and we are speaking telepathically. And at that point, I said to him, I know I'm dead. I knew that. I said, but I didn't have any lights. I had no tunnels and I had no angels and no family. And he just looked at me. He didn't answer me. And, he, it was like, okay. And, I couldn't figure out why did he answer me? And I'll explain that a little bit. But, so he lifted up some sand and I'm watching the sand go through his fingers and I see a fractal universe in his hands, just iron ore and gold and silver and just the most beautiful metallic colors you've ever seen go through his hands. And I knew beneath our feet that we are sitting on universes. I mean, we are walking on universes of all kinds of things. And so we're kind of in a fractal world when you think about it. Beneath our feet are billions and billions and trillions of other universes. Okay, it's not just Earth. It is so much. And so he said to me, he took me to the Sumerian tablets and I read them, put my hands on them. I knew exactly what they said. I don't know what they say today. He took me to the pyramids. I was able to read the hieroglyphics at the Sphinx and the pyramid. We went to South America, up through Machu Picchu and up through Central America and to Mexico. And the way that we did that is we flew by using the speed of our thought. So he taught me, hold out your hands, close your eyes, and whatever you think, you're there. And so that's how we flew. And so we visited all these beautiful things. My guide seemed to know what I loved. And so that's where he was taking me to everything that I loved on the earth. And I have to jump back to the Sumerian tablets to tell you that that's when I realized that I had lived before, because I knew when I saw them that I had been a part of that, and that I had seen that. And so I knew then that reincarnation was a very real thing. And I had lived during that time. And so we had gotten through the Mexican pyramids, and I loved every one of them. Every one was just spectacular. And he said, stretch out your hands. Are you ready to go? And I said, go where? And he said, just think, let's go. And so we started traveling throughout space. And I guess I went to the cleansing pool before. I don't really remember. But we got into space and we got up around Orion's belt. And I said, "Oh, that's Orion's belt." And he said, "Yes, it is." And at Orion's belt, there was a spacecraft. And a spacecraft is like a city. And yes, it had a round part like you think of a spacecraft, but there were large buildings and rectangular shapes and circular shapes, and it was just magnificent. And so it seemed to me that we walked into kind of a back door, and we walked up, or we drifted up some steps. Now remember, everything is not physical. There is nothing physical there. It's all in another dimension, okay? So it's more real than here, but it's not physical, if you can understand that. This is physical. We're in a 2 or 3 dimensional world, but that is in a much higher dimension. And so we go into this back door and we walk up this long hallway, and it's illuminated. And we go into this room that's very plain. It's very light. And there are places to sit. I see a chair for me, only it's not a physical chair. It's in the mind. And there's a long table, and there's lights coming from underneath. Excuse me. So anyway, the lights are coming up from underneath the table. And but I don't know if I go to sit down first or I have to stand back. I can't remember. But suddenly in walks 5 beings. And I call these ET beings. They're not angels. They don't have wings or anything like that. They look like extraterrestrials to me. And the first one that walks in is a very short gray guy. And he has a mustache. He has a handlebar mustache, which is very strange. And he's a little gray, very friendly, very inviting and hospitable kind of ET. He's the one that's kind of leading me. And behind him comes other 4 beings. And the little gray guy says to me, "Have a seat." And he says, "Don't be nervous, just have a seat." And I said, "Okay." And so I believe here is where I also asked them, why didn't I have lights, tunnels, angels, you know? And they just look at me like, "Are you serious? Are you really serious?" And so I'm like, "Well, yeah, because everybody else has them. Why wouldn't I?" And so they just looked at me like, "Are you serious?" And I went, "Okay, I guess I've always read that that's what people had, and so I assumed that's what I needed to have too, and I didn't have that." So anyway, so it went on, and I am supposing that this was a life reading, but I don't remember it, and I do remember some specific things where they were asking me questions, such as they brought me a book, and it was on old computer paper from the 1990s, and they had on it binary code, and they handed it to me, and they told me to read it, and I said, "I don't read binary code." And they looked at me telepathically, and they said, "Really?" And they said, "Look at it again." And I must have read it. And I read the whole thing, and they said, "Thank you." The one on the end was very, very tall, very white. There was absolutely no eye contact at all. The one sitting next to her was, I can't remember. The third one, I believe, was bluish and had kind of a beak. And I kind of remember those eyes being like a bird. And then the one sitting next to that dude, I don't remember. And then the little short guy with a mustache. And so I guess if I was hypnotized, I'd be able to remember them. I hope so. But maybe there was a reason I didn't. I don't know. But Anyway, so at that point in time, they said, let's, okay, you did fine. This is good. You passed this part. Let's, we're going to take you to another room and have you do some more. I said, okay. So they took me down the hall, to a round part of the building, and it was part of a spaceship. And so there were some, ET beings in there. They were having a great time, and they were working, but they read star charts in there. And so this time on their computer system, they brought up for me constellations, and I had to identify them and tell them where they were and some things about them. So this is where my father's teaching to me as a child came in very handily, and he had, everything he taught me, I was able to tell them. And so they took the binary code tablet that I had in the other room. They took it and they put it on the floor and they burned it. And they thought that was fun. They thought that was humorous. I don't know why, but, but they were having a good time doing that. And I could see their humor, and their humor was less serious than ours. So they thought that was funny. So anyway, after that finished, they said to me, well, you're finished here, and you are free to go. And I said, okay. And so they opened up the door to the spaceship, and they said, you can go anywhere in the universe you'd like. I said, oh, okay, well, thank you. And so I was going along, I assumed. And so I took off, and I started flying by the speed of thought. And I noticed to one of my sides, there was a young man traveling with me. And he didn't say anything. We just nodded, and I nodded. And I assumed he was there in just in case I needed something. And anyway, as I'm flying by and going through nebuluses and going through the sky and just really infatuated with what I was seeing, I took a seat on the side of a planet, and he sat on the side of a planet, and we watched a nebulous being created by the Elohim, which is a biblical word, but the correct word Elohim is plural for gods of creation. So the gods of creation were creating a nebulous. And Elohim is a Hebrew word, but so when I say that it was creating a nebulous, it was an energy source itself, the Elohim. And it was like, I say it like a witch wand. Okay, so it was a long band, and it was circular with light here, and on the ends of all of its little sparkles were sparkles of energy, and it was like throwing energy towards the nebulous, and like an artist, like a master creating artistry in the sky. It was just absolutely fabulous. And the Elohim seemed to look back at me, and it said, you see, there's nothing that I create that I don't love. There is absolutely nothing that I create that I don't love. I love everything, and I love to create. That's what I do. And that's what humans are supposed to do. Create. Create. And so it was just, it was so joyful and so loving and kind. And of course, these were different words than I heard growing up, because I came from a military family, and, very, I don't want to use the word judgmental, but very stern. And so watching this Elohim um, grow and create space was amazing. And just watching its happiness was joyful. It brings me joy to know that it was so happy. And when I got home and I got better, I started creating myself. And it's brought me a great deal of happiness So it taught me how to create. And so, anyway, in the distance, I can hear my sister calling me saying, Bonnie, you've got to come home now. You can't die. She said she talked to my deceased mother, and my deceased mother said, no, it's not her time. She needs to come back. And my sister was saying, well, you have all these animals. Who's going to take care of them? We have nobody to take care of your animals. You've got to come back. And so she had been saying this to me all along, but I had been ignoring her. And I didn't want to hear her because I was enjoying myself so much. And so as I'm sitting on that planet, and after I'm watching the Elohim, I can hear her saying, your dog, Kashi, loves you and he misses you. You need to come back. And so I started feeling a little, like I need to go back. And like I feel responsibility suddenly coming upon me. And so, I've heard, okay. One other thing, I got to the absolute perimeter of the universe. And I rarely talk about this because I always forget about it, but I drew pictures of it. And I saw the perimeter around the universe. And I have actually seen pictures of a picture that somebody took of the universe. And it's exactly the same thing that I drew in my picture. But I called it a baby's bundle, and it circles us at a point. And I got up to the point, and there seems to be like foliage up there. And the foliage beings up there are telling me, don't go beyond this point, because any human being that goes beyond this point is never seen again. And so that told me there have been humans that have gotten beyond the point. And they said, so once you leave, we can't come and get you. We can't save you. And so, which I'm going to say now, later on, I realized that we are truly in a matrix. The whole universe is in a matrix, because once we get out of the matrix, we're never seen. Okay. I don't know exactly what that means, but something to think about. So, anyway, I said, oh, okay. And so, I'm just fascinated by them telling me about the baby bundle. And, anyway, I'm hearing my sister saying, you gotta come home, you gotta come home. And she's getting louder and louder, and I'm paying attention now. And so I look at the guy who's with me, young man, and he says to me, are you ready? Have you made your decision? And I said, yeah, I guess I need to go back. And he says, okay. He says, then come here. And I went over to him, and he said, he opened up a tunnel for my humorous. He was being humorous. He opened up a tunnel, and it was purple. And he says, jump into the tunnel of purple, and you will slide back into your body. And so as I jumped in, he said to me, don't forget love, because love is the only glue that is holding this universe together. And so I said, okay. And so at that point, I slid back into my body. I felt nothing. I mean, it didn't hurt or anything, because I was in a coma. I was unconscious. I've always said that about my sister. And knowing I heard her, well, about less than 6 months ago, and it's been 5 years, almost 5 years, 4.5, since my incident. So about 6 months ago, I said to her, she said, I never said that to you in the hospital. And I said, you never said that to me? She said, no. I said, were you thinking it? And she said, yes. So I was telepathic. I was understanding her telepathically.